Okay, it's now 4 o'clock and I'm going to call the meeting to order. I've had no request to pull anything from the consent items, but there are several requests to speak. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for each one if you would like to speak to it. And I'm going to confirm with two of my colleagues who didn't speak to me before the meeting, there's nothing to be pulled from consent. Do you want anything pulled from consent or just to speak?
I'd like to make a statement, but I'd like to ask some questions.
Sure. Okay, so we'll go through them in order, but the motion will be for all of the items. So I'm going to go through them and ask if there's anyone that wants to speak, including asking questions on 2.1, 2.2. I'd like to speak to that really briefly. I understand that we only have a couple of months left with the implementation of the decreased speed limit in school zones. So I'm very excited that we're working our way through the list. And I want to thank staff for their diligent work on that. And I look forward to completing that list. 2.3, 2.4, Councillor Park.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to talk about how exciting this is to offer further opportunities for the municipality to work together with educational partners and other leaders out there in our community looking for new ways to fix old problems. So thanks for all the good work on that and look forward to hearing about how successful it is.
2.5, Councillor Squire first and then Usher.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm just going to link this to 2.7. I looked at both of these reports and what I'm really interested in, because I hear about it all the time, is where are we going on the state of the water in the Thames River? There's two reports here. Are we making progress? Is something going to happen? How close are we? I'm hearing constantly about, storm sewers going into the Thames River, farms, leaching into the Thames River. Are we making any progress in those areas?
Through the chair, we absolutely are making progress. We've actually reduced the amount of phosphorus since 2009 by approximately 30% to the Thames River. So we are making progress. We still have a lot more work to do, and that's why we are partners in the Lake Erie Action Plan for phosphorus reduction as well with the province and the federal government. And we still have a lot of work to do, and we want to move ahead and continue to improve the situation, but we are making advancements, and these two reports are going to help us to try to achieve even better water quality in the Thames River.
Just to follow up, it's really the number when you say reduce phosphorus 30%, that's really helpful because, when people are having sort of one-off conversations with someone like me saying, the Thames River is a mess and you're not doing anything about it, I've got something that I can reply and say, you know what, we're not just a bunch of committees, we're actually making tangible progress on this. So that's of great use to me. Thank you.
Thank you. And before I go to Councillor Usher, who's next, I do need to check if there's any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, we will continue on to Councillor Usher.
I was about to say that I have pecuniary interest in everything since I drink the water. Just kidding. When I was reading this, I keep thinking that the amount of work that we're doing it for our area of the Thames. But a lot of this stuff comes from, should I say downstream or upstream? I'm not so sure where I am. But before it arrives here. So what happens to, I'll use the word contamination before it arrives in our territory?
Through the chair, this kind of links back to what I was speaking to before as well, is that there's a lot of people, a lot of different organizations within the Thames River and the Lake Erie watershed that are going to have to change the way they're doing things if we want to try to reduce that phosphorus and the impacts on the Thames River. So the upstream, we have what we call non-point sources. So those are things like agricultural complexes or large greenhouses, things like that. There's not a lot that we as a city can actively do. That's something that the province is working with others on. We do monitor the quality of water coming into the city and then the quality of the water leaving the city, so we have a good understanding of what's happening within our city and what our impacts are. Beyond that, we would really have to work with the province and ensure that they're being as diligent with the other folks outside the jurisdiction of the City of London as they are being with us.
Okay, seems kind of tough from from my perspective. One of the things that you mentioned in the discussion is that you talk about opportunities for input, and you mentioned the First Nations, and then you go down in the next paragraph and you talk about a committee of, but you don't mention the First Nations in that. Is it because they are not part of the committee as a whole that's making this decision?
Through the chair, Tom Copeland, who is part of the committee, and this kind of links into that Thames River Clearwater Revival, which we do have First Nations input on. And I can tell you that we do reach out and we are working very closely with them, especially on overflows. We actually have a meeting next week with Chippewa, the Thames, and Oneida First Nations to look at better ways to be able to communicate when we do have overflows. So that's part of the work that came out of the Pollution Prevention Control Plan, but I can let Tom speaks more specifically to the people that were involved in drafting the plan.
Through the chair to the councillors, one of the first groups that the City of London went to when we were developing the Thames River Clearwater Revival terms of reference was the First Nations. And they were very pleased that we went to them before any decisions were made about anything really. And they've been a part of the steering committee from day one. The representation has changed somewhat. The Oneida Nation was strong at the beginning, and then the Chippewas of the Thames came on. And so all First Nations are trying to build capacity. They've been involved. We've created a subcommittee of just First Nations that are helping inform us of some of the traditional knowledge that they have, and that we can incorporate it into the Thames Clearwater Revival.
Thank you very much. I knew that Tom was very involved with this, and I really do appreciate that. It will always come up, the question will always be asked, particularly in these times where we are talking about reconciliation. So whenever we can formally put it in these reports, I think it's worth it. So thanks very much. My last question is to do with funding, Madam Chair. This is this is a costly item. And if you turn to page 39, can you help me understand all this money? We got short-term $26.6 million, medium-term 197, which I think is up to 10 years. And then long-term, this is an additional 60 million, which is up to 20 years. And the reason I'm asking is two things. I'm trying to figure out where we're going to get the money from, but I'm also trying to figure out if there's any chance of us getting some federal funding, because the federal government came up with a legislation some time ago, about 2 or 3 years ago, which was a 20-year plan for us to do exactly this. And I believe that they've got about $20 billion in their kitty. So I don't know if we are aware of that. I'm sure you guys are aware of it. But Madam Chair, I was just wondering if there any chance of us getting some funding there.
Sure, Mr. Mathers.
Through the chair, that's absolutely what we intend to do. As part of, if you crawl back when we brought forward the municipal actions that we were proposing to be included in the Lake Erie Action Plan that the province has finalized. They finalized that in February, and they included all of our actions verbatim. A number of those actions actually have asterisks on them saying that they are that we're committing to do those things based on having funding. So we will be looking at trying to get both provincial and federal funding. At the most recent provincial budget, there was a component that spoke to, it was over $50 million worth of funding for various items, and one of them was specifically for Lake Erie Action Plan goals and to meet those actions. So we are very optimistic, and we think that the projects that are included in the Pollution Prevention Control Plan very closely to align to the projects that the province is looking to fund to support Lake Erie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Helmer.
My questions are about 2.5, the Pollution Prevention Control Plan. So there's a whole number of projects that are identified, and looking at them each in isolation, I think it's easy to lose track of sort of the sequencing of what's going to be happening. And there's a couple that are really major. You know, what's happening with the Pall Mall line, what's happening with combined sewer separation at King, Thames, York, and then Richmond Street, and some of the north-south streets downtown. So I wonder if our staff could just walk us through at a high level, like what we're talking about doing over the sort of next 10 years. These all seem to be either now or medium term, so we can get a better understanding of that.
Mr. Mathers?
Absolutely, through the chair. I'll walk through the first phase of the first phase, I'll call it. And a lot of that work and a component of that has actually already started. So the York Street Sewer Separation Project, that is one of the paramount considerations for this entire plan. The first phase has progressed and it's currently under construction. That was a $6.9 million project, and that is only for 2.5 blocks. We have 9 more phases. There's 9 phases in total of that York Street, and we feel that that's probably what we're going to be working away at over the next 0 to 5 years. And then probably getting closer to that end of the 5-year period, we'll start to bring on more projects. That is, unless we can start getting some of this funding that we had suggested from the provincial and federal sources. If we can do that, then we will be fast tracking these projects for the most part as well. One of our actions speaks to separating 18 kilometers of sewer, of a storm or combined sewer within a certain time frame. So if we can get that funding and then we can fast track these projects, that'll be the way that we do it. Otherwise, we're really going to have to be fitting these projects into our 20-year plan, and we're going to have a lot of competing priorities as part of that plan. I have highlighted those in a paragraph under the cost implications, and I will just suggest that going into that next multi-year budget, that we'll have to give a lot of thought of what our priorities are going to be from a water wastewater perspective.
Okay, I want to dig into a couple of the projects that have been identified a bit more. So M2, this is a project that's affecting the Group A sort of issues. It's $42 million, multiple different phases, a lot of which are overlapping with segments or crossing segments of the rapid transit corridors. And in terms of coordination with rapid transit, what is the sort of plan for the sewer separation parts that are listed in M3 or M2, sorry, at the various different phases there?
Through the chair, I'll just talk broadly, and then I'll have Marcy McKillop, who's the project manager, speak more specifically to some of the project elements. Whenever we do any type of infrastructure renewal project, whether it's just our standard local street, or if it's an arterial road, or if it's rapid transit, we try to coordinate our work with the work and needs of the other groups, including the drinking water side, the water engineering group, and then also our transportation needs. Whenever we can do that, we can save up to 50% of the cost for that, for the replacement of the asphalt surface and the bedding underneath that as well. So whenever we can ensure that we implement these projects in coordination, that's going to save everyone money, and it's a much more effective way of bringing these projects forward. So that will be our goal. As far as the specific projects, I'll let Marcy speak to the specifics.
Through the chair, M2 includes 4 of the 9 phases of sewer separation in the downtown core, which Scott described. So that's really key to meeting the priorities that we identified through the Lake Erie Action Plan, and it is really key to the pollution prevention and control plan.
Thank you. There's another project that's listed from Elizabeth along Queens Ave. It's one of these projects in the long term, and it says basically only if necessary, depending on how we do on these other initiatives. And I wonder at what point in the process do you think you'll have a sense of whether that project is going to be necessary and whether it's proceeding?
Through the chair, a lot of this work is going to depend on the amount of water that we can remove, stormwater we can remove from the sanitary system. So we'll want to be monitoring before some of these projects take place, and then also after, to see if we've achieved our goals. At a certain point, of course, we want to try to eliminate as much stormwater from our system as possible, but there gets to a point where it's a cost benefit of doing these large scale projects versus the operational cost, and then the risk of basement flooding and the risk of overflows. So if it was a project that's in the long term, it probably wouldn't be until the 5 to 10 period where we'd actually establish the need for the project.
Okay, through the chair, a question about M4, and first let me say, I'm sorry I didn't bring or mention it at all last night when we had a number of residents from this area in the gallery. But there's one area that's quite large in terms of the area of the city that's feeding down into the Medway pumping station. And it's been identified that the targeted weeping tile disconnection program in that area would be effective. I wonder what's the timeline for that? I think it says medium term for the timing, but do we know more specifically when we might be reaching out to either the entire area or certain neighborhoods in that area to try and get going on that? And I know that the budget is listed at 17 million. That says it's 100% participation. My understanding is we probably could get by with less than 100%. And so I wonder if you could speak to that as well.
Through the chair, yeah, absolutely. There is the need to undertake this work as soon as we can. We have had smaller scale projects where we've had very high participation. I'll let Tom speak to one of those in the Sherwood area. We also are able to do on a very smaller scale if we have some localized basement flooding that we think is impacted by a specific area. We do have funding in the existing budget to try to look at these areas in a more specific way. Now, if you're going to have a very broad program, which is suggested here, then we would need to be very sure that we have enough commitment to actually make a significant difference. What we find in a lot of these programs is that if you don't get close to, not necessarily 100%, but if you at least have to get 50% to actually make a dent and make it cost-effective project to proceed. Maybe Tom could provide some details of the previous project that was in the Sherwood area.
Yes, through the chair, we looked at an area in Sherwood Forest, and the Weeping Tile Disconnection Program, as you well know, we offered 100% funding for the disconnection. There were 3 areas that had chronic basement flooding. We offered the same program to all 3 areas. We even offered a $1,000 check for them to take part. We are looking for 60% buy-in to make the project worthwhile. Of those 3 areas, we only had 60% achieved in one area, so we went forward. So in the medium term, what we're going to do with that Weeping Tile Disconnection Program is focus on areas that have chronic basement flooding and knock those off first before we start getting into reducing I&I at some of our pumping stations and things like that. The Pollution Prevention Control Plan, it's not chiseled in stone. We're going to update it every 5 years, so it's like, 5 years, let's do a course correction, see what the health of the river is, see what our biggest problems are, and then shift our direction to meet those challenges.
Okay, last question, I think, for now is in terms of the Pall Mall sewers. I know in other discussions we've been talking about what needs to happen with those sewers. What is the sort of vision for what's happening there in terms of upsizing, potential relocation of either the relief line or the trunk lines?
Well, we've got a lot of ideas at this time, but not. There still needs to be work to do to come up with some concrete actions. The Pall Mall sewer has a number of weirs on it. So the first easy thing to do is increase the height of those weirs. Now we've got to put that in our model, see what the impact is, and perhaps it's usually not a combination of one thing. Maybe increase the height of the weir and do some selective weeping tile disconnections in the area to make it work. We got to see how the growth in the downtown core works as well. We've also looked at using that Pall Mall storm relief as a storage vessel and block it off at the downstream end and potentially pump up into the gravity sewer system at that. So there's still work to be done on that.
Okay. 2.6, Councillor Park, and then Usher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe I got my numbers wrong earlier when we discussed. I wanted to talk about ways later.
Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm very excited about this project, and I'm really glad to see that it's going ahead. But I'm going to ask the simplest question first. in the title, it says notice of completion, but nowhere else in the paper does it say notice of completion. So I need to understand, when we get this stage of the environmental assessment and we're setting out, is this what we mean by, at that time it's completed? Is this what we refer to as completed?
Through the chair, once the notice of completion is issued, then there's a 30-day review period that allows people to review it, provide comments, and then if someone has a concern with it, then they can bump that up to the minister and put in a Part 2 order. So this is the end of the process.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to clarify it for myself, my own understanding. So we're going to build a new facility on Dingman Drive, so that means we have enough property there to build it, or we don't have to buy another property? There was a house beside that thing at one time. Did we buy that, or that's still there, residence?
Through the chair, we have not purchased that property. We would have to entertain and negotiate with the property owner there to purchase the property. And that would be a subsequent process we would be entering into.
Okay, so, but it would be another pumping station which would be directing up to Dingman, I mean up to, what's the name? Up to which one?
Through the chair, so this pumping station would include a force main that would then pump the flow from South London into the trunk sanitary sewer that system within the core of the city, and then discharge to Greenway Pollution Control Plant eventually.
So it wouldn't go into the one that's there at all? Okay, thank you. My other question, Madam Chair, through you, is to do with the cost and timing. It talks about, given increasing residential, industrial, commercial development pressure on the Southwest, the need for this has accelerated by approximately 5 years. And then you continue on, corresponding the timing of the 2 Southwest treatment capacity project will need to be accelerated to 2018, 2019. What does that 2018, 2019, is that the completion of this pumping station?
Through the chair, the construction would be, the design would start in 2018, and then the construction would be in 2019.
And at a cost of about $25 to $38 million, do we have that in the budget?
Through the chair, this is a development charges funded work, similar to like the GMIS work that we do. So we would have to be looking at using funding from the City Services Reserve Fund. There was, the 2014 development charges study did include these projects. Now the EA cost is higher than that initial, those values. So they are within the budget, but there isn't there would still be a required budget amendment to facilitate this work.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Good questions. I can move on to 2.7. I have Councillor Squire first.
I already spoke to it.
Okay, Councillor Usher on 2.7.
I guess this is one of those similar to the first questions that I asked with respect to the entire area. And I was wondering how we're going to accommodate it, but I think you answered that in my first question. But again, here you talk about the First Nations, and I really want to congratulate the staff for constantly bringing the First Nations into these, because these are the type of projects that the First Nations are very concerned about, both upstream and downstream. So I just wanted to make that statement and congratulate you for that. Just a second though, before I close you off. Yeah, that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you. On 2.8, anybody? Councillor Usher?
So, given the discussion that we had last week with respect to the 100,000 square meters capacity or capping, why are we going back to Hamlin Road for this? Is it because we want to pick up that new stuff that we did at Hamlin Road a couple of years ago?
Through the chair, this is the third phase of work that started at the Wonderland pumping station. So it started at Dingman Drive and it's working its way up. So the end of the phase 2 was right at Hamlin Road.
And my other question to do is that somewhere in this you talk about Exeter Road. But when you, on page 88, you said approximately 150 feet sanitary sewer on Exeter Road, 700 meters on Warren Cliff. But in the details, you seem to exclude Exeter Road. Are you going into Exeter Road at all, or you're just passing across it?
Through the chair, it's just crossing Exeter Road, yes. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. 2.9. 210. 210, Councillor Park. Oh, 2.9, Councillor Usher, go ahead.
Second. Okay. I think this one, I just wanted to commend staff on this because this is something that's new for us. And it seems to save us a lot of money from my observation. Not only does it save us a lot of money, but it seems to save us a lot of headaches out in the community because we're working strictly underground. And even though we have the construction and people know, we don't have to cut off roads and all of this. And I believe this is the third major project that we're doing. I believe, I may be wrong. I mean, they're big, but I really am impressed with the way we have been doing this over the past about 8 years now. So I just wanted to commend staff on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. 211 or 210, Councillor Park, and then Hubert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to take this opportunity to thank staff for the work that's gone into this area. I know that there's a slightly unrelated community meeting that was held, and I just want to take this opportunity to thank them. I believe this may have been the first time that staff were applauded at an infrastructure renewal meeting in this area. I know that this particular area of my ward feels that they haven't had any city work done since they were annexed way before I was born. So to see some work hitting the ground, they'll be very pleased about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hubert? It is now. Go to 211, and Councillor Hubert, you can start it off.
Thank you. You know, Waze is kind of cool, and this is a kind of a neat project. My only question about it is it's really, the genius of it is it's driver to driver. It's sort of, you're uploading stuff all the time. I'm not sure I figured out how they do this while they're driving, but that, I don't really want to know about that. But what I do want to know is, and I think it's in here, but I wasn't absolutely sure, is there the capacity for the city itself to be populating the system with road closures and those sorts of things? Is that an opportunity with this, and is that part of the integration?
Mr. Soldo?
Thank you, through the chair, to the councillor. That's actually the genesis of this report. We have the Renewed London site, and that's a great tool. But what we wanted to do is actually take all that information when we have any projects, when we have any road closures, when we have any maintenance work, and be able to push it out to Waze so that next time that someone comes up and is trying to find a route, that information will be available there. So we're looking to establish this partnership with Google to do that. And if anyone else, any other applications came out, we'd also be trying to do that as well.
Does that facility or capability already exist in the app with Google? I didn't even realize that Google owned Waze, but that's my own ignorance. But does that already exist, that capacity?
Through the chair to councillor, right now, I believe the City of Toronto is currently utilizing, pushing that information out to Waze, and I know that City of Winnipeg just signed an agreement. But I'm going to ask my two experts to provide an update as well.
Two experts?
Through the chair, yes. If you go into Waze today, there is some limited information that's been published by drivers. So noticed the other day, like Dundas Street is showing up as being closed. That's the sort of thing that once with the integration, the city would be pushing that information out. Much more reliable when it comes from the municipality than it is from, say, a citizen. But so the information actually gets published sooner if we do it than if you do it yourself.
Sorry, one final question. So does that always have to be real time? In other words, this morning at 6 o'clock a.m., someone would have to push that out? Or are you able to basically block book it that road's closed for the next 6 weeks or whatever it happens to be?
Through the chair, the way we envision the app will be working is Renew London is kept up to date currently. And whenever a change is made to Renew London, that would automatically get pushed out to Waze. So it'd be a background application, working with Waze. So there would be no additional interaction from the city to actually push it out. But they would always Waze would always have the most current information. So the information should be the same, whether you looked at Renew London or looked at the Waze site.
Yeah, I think you answered it. I'm not absolutely sure. But we don't have to have someone pushing that out on a day-to-day basis. It can be block booked for the length of a project. I'm getting nods. I'll take that as a yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Squire, Park, and then Helmer. Councillor Squire is declining, so I'll go to Councillor Park.
Thank you. I just want to express my happiness with this. I think that making sure that we have this real-time information to people in ways that's going to alleviate stress no matter how they're commuting across the city, whether it's by bus, cycle, on foot, or in a car. I think that's just an incredible step forward for the city in terms of real-time communications. I just wonder, will we be doing communications on bike accessibility and those sorts of things on the TVP? So I just see how this could be another tool. Like, say there has to be work and a part of the TVP is shut down for a period of time. It would just be nice to have cyclists have that information also, if at all possible.
Through the chair to the councillor, right now the way that the app would work is anything that's on Renew London would get pushed out. So working with our other departments, the more information we can put on Renew London, not only is it better for that site, but anything else that we push out as well. So we'll definitely work with our parks partners to ensure if that's something they can do, that they can actually implement this within Renew London.
Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I certainly echo what my colleagues are saying. It's very exciting to see this happening. I was reminded, Mr. Soldo, through the chair, it was 3 years ago that I think I emailed yourself and Mr. Lawrence, who at the time was in charge of construction administration. I said, how can we get this information into Waze? And I actually emailed Waze almost exactly 3 years ago saying, hey, how can we do this? And I'm really glad that they have a program now where we can do that in an effective way, that municipalities can just share this information that's obviously of interest to people trying to travel throughout the city, and that there's an easy way for us to do that, and then we're moving forward on it. It seemed like a good opportunity a couple of years ago, and I'm glad we've got to this point, so we can get this information out to people. It's really, really handy. Waze is a great platform. It's a great way of municipalities and the private sector collaborating to solve problems for people in the real world. So thanks very much for the report.
Thank you. I'll go next to 212, and I have Councillor Squire. Okay, that was my error. Councillor Usher, 212.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to 212, I want to ask a question. Do we really need the Springbank number 2? It seems to me that that's the one that we're working on, and it's also the smallest one, and maybe it's not a cut and dry answer. It's also the oldest one. So what if is it possible to just say we'll eliminate it, or we have to go through this environmental assessment to say, yeah, we could do it, and this will be the result, but we don't know that yet.
Through the chair, that will be part of this analysis. Of course, the need, like with any EA, not having a structure is an opportunity, the opportunity to do nothing, or to actually just remove the structure. In our opinion, from an operational perspective, there is a very large benefit for the City of London. A lot of it comes down to being able to cost effectively provide a source of water and use at non-peak times and at peak times in the core of the city. So what this facility allows us to do is to pump at night from our Arbor pumping station, store it during the day, allow that Springbank dam to dissipate during the day, Springbank dam, Springbank reservoir during the day, and then have those energy savings associated with it. So it'll be part of that cost analysis, because if the electricity is a lower cost than reconstructing the facility or the ongoing operation and maintenance, then that's going to be something we're looking at as part of this EA.
Just in case anybody has asked me if I'm crazy, the reason I'm asking that is because at one time we didn't have the Southeast Reservoir. The Southeast Reservoir, now we have it, which is 113 million liters. So all I'm saying is that now that we have that, but I do respect the fact we have to do an assessment, because that's way over on one side and the pumping station, this number 2 is on the other side. So I got my answer, and thank you very much. Thanks. I'd be happy to move.
Thank you. I do need a mover for 2.1 to 2.13, moved by Usher, seconded by Hubert. We'll put that up for a vote in just a moment. Are there any final comments on any of those numbers? Okay, that will be up for a vote in a moment. Yeah, the vote should be open on screen. If you're not seeing the vote pop up, if you hit the refresh button and then go to current item, it should be open. Refresh is the little circle thing in your address bar. Okay, could I get IT support for Councillor Squire? He's going to vote manually, and I'll get him to do that on the microphone for the consents.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. On item 3.1, we have a public participation meeting. Mr. Pompelli was here earlier and said he would introduce this item. And I expect you can do an introduction for both, although we'll hold the PPM separate. But if you want to give us a little bit of context, starting with 3.1.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pinch hitting tonight for Matt Felberg, who wasn't able to attend. With item 3.1, this relates to the renaming of Center Street, just that portion of Center Street east of Pond Mills Road. So it's an open road allowance between Pond Mills Road and Shelburne Place. It's currently within a draft approved plan of subdivision, identified as a future collector road. It will, through the draft plan, it will be completed as a secondary collector road, but it will act as the extension of Devron Crescent. So this renaming relates to that, and it's needed in order to reduce any confusion with the Center Street that's located just off of Warrencliffe Road, further west in the city.
Thank you for that. Can I have are there any questions, first of all, on the renaming? And can I have a motion to open the PPM? Moved by Park, seconded by Usher. Now is a great time for your question, Councillor Usher. Please go ahead.
Thank you to the staff, Madam Chair. May I ask why we selected Crescent, Devon Crescent? I was always of the impression that a crescent you go in and out, and this is a straight street. It's almost like an off from the regular Devon Crescent. Devon Crescent is sort of complicated by itself.
Through you, Madam Chair, this road allowance will actually be part of Devron Crescent. So Devron Crescent currently ends at Shelburne Place, and through the approval of the draft plan of subdivision, Devron Crescent will be extended through this easement. So it's just a completion of that last link of Devron, from where Devron Crescent currently ends at Shelburne Place, west through to Pond Mills. So it's just the completion of Devron Crescent.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Usher? I think what I heard was that it may not be a half circle, but it creates a full circle. Is that your question?
What I'm saying is that maybe what he's saying is that Crescent, it ends right now in Sheldon, and then all it's going to do, it's extended to Pond Mills. So it still continues the curve, which is what I was thinking. So it's in from one end, it still comes out at the other end. Does it, I don't remember, does it start at Pond Mills down below? Or it starts in Sheldon?
The complete rotation of Devron comes in from, I believe, Commissioners Road and extends through this subdivision and ends currently at Shelburne Place.
Okay, I'm not gonna belittle it. I just wanted to get a little answer, and I think I got a little bit of it, but I'll go along with it.
Thank you. We're going to open the PPM. There's a map on 119, which I had to reference myself, and I'm trying to orient myself because I think it's backwards to what I would think it should be. But I believe it kind of goes around the L between Commissioners and Pond Mills Road. So it still creates that crescent there. So I have to vote on screen to open the PPM. We've had some questions. If everyone else can vote on screen, and when that's done, Councillor Squire has stepped out of the meeting, and Councillor Hubert has voted on screen or is having problems. Okay.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Thank you very much. So the public participation meeting on the renaming of Center Street in Pond Mills is now open. Are there any speakers for this? Seeing none, I'll need a motion to close the PPM. Moved by Park, seconded by Usher. And voting is open on screen.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. There's a recommendation by staff. Can I get someone who wants to move the staff recommendation? Councillor Hubert, seconded by Councillor Usher. We'll get that up on screen. Voting is open on screen.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, the next item, Mr. Pompelli, did you want to speak to this briefly?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next item refers to the street renaming of various streets across the city, specifically the renaming of La Stradella, Middlewood, Tallwood, and the Birches. Through a check of documents and records throughout the city, a number of streets were historically registered without a suffix. It's come to Civic Administration's attention that some area residents have added their own suffix to the mailing addresses for these streets, which presents a variety of issues, as some streets will have a different suffix depending on the property owner's preference. Recently, Emergency Management Services flagged this item when a new recruit could not locate a residential dwelling on Tallwood using the address that was provided by the caller. And as a result, the resident provided a suffix to a street name that didn't legally exist. This prompted an internal review and the discovery that on this street, on Tallwood, that 22% of the residents used either the suffix of road or crescent, so it created a bit of a problem. So as a result, Civic Administration undertook the full review of all streets within the city's jurisdiction and discovered that that there are 6 streets that do not have a suffix tied to their official street name. And during part of the review, so we're bringing forward a recommendation. We're not including streets such as the Parkway and the Ridgeway as part of our recommendation, as these street names are registered without a suffix. There's been no issues identified with either one of these street names, and EMS services were contacted specifically relating to these streets, and they had no concerns with adding a suffix to these street names. So the recommendation that we're bringing forward is to rename La Stradella to La Stradella Gate, Middlewood to Middlewood Drive, Tallwood to Tallwood Circle, and the Birches to the Birches Place. And also that the city be required to fund the cost for the change, including but not limited to the registration of the bylaw.
Thank you very much. Questions on this, Councillor Usher? No? I need a motion to open the PPM, moved by Usher, seconded by Hubert. We can vote on screen in a moment.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. I'll now look to members of the public to see if anyone would like to speak on this item. Seeing no one, I'll look for a motion to close the PPM. Usher and Hubert. Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Councillor Hubert has indicated he will move the staff recommendation for this item. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Usher, thank you very much. Are there any other comments on it? We'll put that up to be voted on.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, item 3.3, Mr. Stanford has agreed with me that he will make a 9.5-minute presentation. I talked him down from about 10 90-minute presentations, so we should be quick, but there will be time for questions. So he's going to do a condensed presentation in the anticipation that this committee asks lots of good questions. And if you want to flip your screen, it'll be on screen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 9.5 minutes will begin, and I'll be sharing it with the project manager, Wesley Abbott, and I see I'm being timed. We're going to cover off 5 items, and the reason we can get this done in 9.5 minutes is because you've actually seen much of this already. We're at the 1-year mark of the development of our terms of reference process as part of our individual environmental assessment. The key part of this is to actually prepare our terms of reference with the community, and that is what we have achieved to date, and that is what is before you today in your package. And on the screen, as you see, some very large numbers. That's about 130 pages. Then there's the supporting documentation that you have not received but will be on the website when this goes out for stakeholder consultation. It is a large project. Not a surprise, it's a very important one. So that was a year ago when we got started. 6 months ago, we did come to you, and committee and council made some key decisions to help us move forward on the terms of reference. You basically made comments on these 5 key parameters. We'll walk through quickly from a reminder perspective. Yes, expanding the W12A landfill site was and remains the right thing to do. That was actually confirmed in 2008 and reconfirmed as part of our terms of reference process. We compared that against a number of different alternatives. As far as length of the project, we looked at everything up to 35 years and down to 20. We have picked 25 years, and as you see on the screen, from a website feedback, that was received agreement. Some did think it should go longer than that. As much from a perspective of what should the capacity on an annual basis be at the W12A landfill site, looking out 25 years, knowing that we still have 7 years to go at that site. So starting in 2025, we currently could have been bringing in at that point in time 650,000 tons. We have lowered that number to 500,000 tons. So that was something that was approved by council. As far as the limits on the tonnage, this is one where we looked at it from the perspective of should we have a higher number? And clearly that number of 500,000 tons actually includes a contingency and allows for regional municipalities with conditions from council to access. So as we moved into that discussion, and that started very shortly after the terms of reference process began last year, we approached our neighboring jurisdictions and we received their commentary. And it was part of that that we actually developed what could the regional service area look like. And as you see on the screen there, some people, Oxford County, not interested. They have got landfill capacity for many, many years. Others, a little less interested, but still wanted to be kept within the service area. And then some that were quite interested. So that was all brought into the calculations as we did our design capacity. And that was brought forward and has been before the Ministry of the Environment. They do have some questions. We've answered most of their questions, and we're likely to hear more as part of the next 2 months when it goes forward as part of the government review agency. But from a disposal area, service area, as you see on the screen there, we are covering the counties to the north of us, County of Middlesex the County of Middlesex, which surrounds London, the county to the south of us, Elgin, and then over to Lambton on the west side of the city. And the last thing that was probably the most contentious of the discussion, website feedback, as you see on the screen, indicated about 30%, the blue, were in agreement. A large portion were undecided, and the orange, representing about 1/3 as well, were against this. So we have, as you see on the screen, listed this as split support. What became very apparent, though, in the discussions, especially at our open houses, was if we were ever to proceed on this basis, from hearing from the community, it was essential that council would have the right conditions in place on how other municipalities could get involved. Essentially, the community was telling us they did not want London just open for anyone's garbage, especially if we put in place higher waste diversion programs. They would like to see how other communities were also equaling or even being better than London in that case. And then finally, the last key parameter was council indicating that hey, we have to hit 60% diversion. It is essentially a provincial number that we're responding to here. It's become widely accepted for residential waste. And as you see on the screen, did have very large support in the community at 80%. Mr. Abbott's going to take over and just provide some update on the EA plans that are in your document.
And I'll only be 2 minutes. So because of the work done in the terms of reference, we've been able to really scope or limit the amount of work we're going to have to do the environmental assessment, and also be very specific about the work we're going to do. So on the screen, you can see the existing landfill site in red, and we're either going to expand upward or outward into that purple area shown around the existing landfill site. And we're going to have to expand to more or less double or slightly more than double the existing size of landfill site in order to accommodate our waste for the next 25 years. And you'll also notice the green area, we're making sure we leave sufficient land in the resource recovery area for future facilities we might need for either composting or additional recycling facilities. And because we know this is the area, we're limited to basically 3 or 4 concepts for the expansion, and they're very straightforward. We can go up on the existing footprint that's shown there, and we're going to have to more or less make the landfill site going from 9 meters high to about 35 meters high, about 4 times higher. We can expand to the north, and leaving an appropriate buffer, and then we're going to have to go about 3 times higher. We can expand to the east. We got a little bit more room and go about 2.5 times higher. And those are sort of the 3 basic concepts that we presented to the community, and they seem in general agreement with them. We can't go both to the north and to the east at the same time because of certain constraints with from the Ministry of Environment on minimum slopes we need. We've also presented the public the number of the studies we're going to do to compare those 3 options. They're very standard in any waste management EA, and we also sought feedback on which ones they consider most important. And like every other EA in Ontario, what residents are concerned about: groundwater, air quality, aquatic ecosystems, terrestrial ecosystems, and things they're not really that concerned about: noise, archaeology, and heritage resources. And back to Jay.
And just as a reminder for committee, we're doing a parallel program as well. And essentially, we're looking at how are we going to get to 60% waste diversion. There's a commitment made by council to achieve that, but the how-to is part of an upcoming report. And essentially, we're looking at the packages on the screen there, 3 buckets of work: more work in organics management, what additional recyclables can be recovered and diverted from landfill, and what is the potential for waste reduction and reuse programs, particularly what can we do with food waste avoidance would fall into that particular category. We're going to be back to Civic Works Committee in the month of June with that particular report. But there's also additional work taking place right now and into the future on the technologies behind how do we get to these higher levels of diversion. And those buckets of work include waste conversion, technologies that fall into that category, such as gasification and pyrolysis. More traditional energy from waste will be looked at from a longer-term perspective. And then as well, the package of work on the right-hand side, which is really referred to as mixed waste processing. It is sometimes referred to as mechanical biological treatment. We're examining different technologies within those categories as well. And 2 slides left, Madam Chair, our time frame. So what you see on the screen right now is we're here at the April 17th meeting, heading to council next week. This particular year, so the last 3 months basically, have been taking our draft report, the one just before this, and working with the Ministry of the Environment and some government review agencies for an initial discussion. And we've gone through that, and many of their comments have been included in this report, but we do anticipate more comments as we get into the much more rigid technical discussions over the next 2 months. Essentially, we will be back before you. We're hoping it'll be somewhere in the month of July. Might slip to August because we can't predict how long the review teams will need to get through some of this, as well as the community. But there will be at that point in time a public participation meeting before Civic Works Committee. The last step, of course, is approval from council of the terms of reference. That is then a submission that goes into the Ministry of the Environment and climate change, and it is at that point that the minister then accepts or rejects the terms of reference. Then the real project gets underway, the environmental assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stanford. I'm going to start a speakers list. Councillor Squire, then Hubert, then Usher.
Through the chair, the challenge for me is, having gone through this before, is this movement, this commitment to go from 45 to 60% diversion. And I'm glad you said, well, there's going to be some alternatives coming forward in June, but I continue to worry about cost and where is this going to fit in on the many projects that this council approves in terms of managing tax rates and those sort of things, because I think it's really important that people who live in London, who aren't yet really aware of this subject to the extent they may be aware of other projects, see this coming. And they understand what's coming, and they understand the costs involved. So I guess my question to you is, how soon are we going to start talking about numbers, about the kind of investment we're going to have to make in this in terms of capital, but also what's it going to cost in terms of ongoing operating costs? Because for me, the challenge is, you know, for council to had a debate about green bins at some point in time at a budget process, a very divisive debate, very difficult debate. And it seems to me that the sooner we know what we have to do, the easier it's going to be for next council and also for the people who have to pay the bills.
Through the chair, if I may, the June report will cover costs, both capital and operating, and I couldn't agree more with the comments there. We will bring to you the environmental benefit and the costs associated with that, both capital and operating.
Yeah, and I just want to commend you for that, because I think the one thing I'm going to say is you have a really firm understanding of both sides of the equation. One is the benefits, and also is the cost. And I think you saying to me at this point in time, at least as a councillor, that hey, you're going to see this stuff in June is really, really helpful, and I thank you for that.
Thank you. And I forgot to say thank you to Mr. Abbott, who I can't see over the screen, for your part in the presentation. So thank you very much. Councillor Hubert.
Well, I'm glad to see this going, and I'll echo Councillor Squire's comments about the cost-benefit analysis. And the cost-benefit analysis is really not in a single dimension. You know, there's the environmental element, there's the financial element, there's the societal element, and we need to look at it that way. I am really glad to see that there's interest of other surrounding municipalities. I think London has a role. You know, we just spent a lot of time talking about water, actually, in the first half hour of our meeting. You know, and the water project, the Clean Help Water project of, I guess, the last decade, really, was really a good example of municipalities working together. I think the only way we're all collectively going to get to that 60% target is for a similar collaborative effort, because I don't think particularly smaller municipalities are going to have the capacity to get the economies of scale that they need to get there. And that's a leadership responsibility for us as a city, but also it's an opportunity for us because we can cut down some of our overhead costs by addressing some of their needs as well. So I thought the report and the plan was really quite balanced in that respect. It's pretty apparent that we're going to be looking at new technologies going forward, particularly in the organics, and I think, you know, reflecting on the last decade, you know, we were about this close to a green bin program, and now I think the new technologies we're into the next generation of that. We're not sure what that's going to look like yet. So I think we're in a really good situation to be doing this kind of an EA and to be able to make those choices. And it won't be this council that'll make those choices. We'll get the process going, but it'll be the next council that'll have to make the choices.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Stanford, could you point out to us if there's any other facility that needs to be built on this site? For example, some time ago we were talking about electricity from gas, or however way you want to put it. Where would it go? Where would it be built? Would it be built right on top of this, or we once talked about the berm around this site would cover any facility that we would not see it from a distance. Could you help me understand that? I'm just looking at the site itself right now, the development of the site.
Through the chair, any of the projects that deal with landfill gas, and I think that's what the councillor is referring to, we would be siting those particular facilities inside the landfill site. So that would be inside the berm that already exists right now. Currently, if you're driving along Manning Drive, you see a very large berm, and all our administrative center, the landfill gas current flare, as well as our public drop-off area, our scale house, is just on the other side of the current berm. And for the most part, the screening that is there right now does an excellent job. And so those types of facilities, such as a future landfill gas electricity plant, which will be there over the next couple of years, as well as any other plants would be located in that immediate area. Any type of recycling or composting facility or mixed waste processing facility in the future would be outside of the footprint of the landfill site and in the area that Mr. Abbott had on the screen in the way of that map, which would be just to the east of the current landfill site.
So that's the reason I wanted that clarity, because what I'm hearing is that if we put a building of that nature on, we'll put it right on top of the dump, and therefore we have to excavate through the dump to get that building there, right? How would you do that without excavation?
Through the chair, I've got to clarify a little more. It would not be on top of the landfill site. It would be in the buffer area that is just in the front of the landfill site, just on the other side of the berm.
Okay, that's better. Thank you very much. So the process of this coming through in June and in July and in August, it looks like we're heading into close to what we sometimes refer to as a lame duck council, if we get there. And I just want to know that I would like this to move on rather than have to be stopped and then come back next year, January. I think that the process needs for us to continue to be able to approve this. If you're comfortable with that timing of July and August, that we'll be able to make that.
Through the chair, it is our understanding that if we, well, there's two projects that we've been talking about here. The environmental assessment is one that already has an approved budget associated with it. So all that would be coming forward in the public participation meeting, hopefully in July for that project. If it slipped to August, although it has crossed that period of time, there are still no financial decisions to be made because you have already approved the budget for that particular project. So that one is fine. Through the chair again, if it is for the waste diversion and the resource recovery and the 60% diversion, that would be a different matter. We're still waiting on some final information from the province, and we hope to have more details in the next month dealing with some financing arrangements, dealing with the private sector and private businesses and how they're going to be funding future recycling. We're also anticipating more information on organics management later in April, early May. There will be a period of time when I think we will not receive any further details from the province. So we're trying to juggle all of that. So our target is June for the resource recovery information and the 60% waste diversion information. That may slip to July. Yes, that could have very significant budget implications, and that would have to be dealt with at the time. But if we cross over, and it's already been referred to, much of this, because it is not in the current budget, is future work. And we would anticipate that the next council would be the one that will be picking up those kinds of discussions, but it is this council that will be setting some of the direction for that council. But we do anticipate some of these things could be reopened again, and that's just part of how the nature of what we're dealing with in this subject area.
Exactly. We've talked about these things long enough that we just keep regurgitating, but fortunately, each time we do that, it gets better and better. I want to touch a little bit on, I think it's Councillor Squire started it, but I want to try it in another way. It seems to me that, get through you, Madam Chair, it seems to me that getting from 45 to 60% at this point in time is a challenge. But getting from 60 further in the future is going to be an even bigger challenge. And I think that in some of your past presentation, you identified that it gets more challenging as we go deeper into it. But I don't hear people talking about it. I don't get that people feel that this has to happen. I, for one, feel that it has to happen. When I speak to some people, very few people, they feel that it has to happen. You know, the circles that I talk about with respect to right across Canada, with respect to the National Zero Waste Council, that's the intention, to get to zero waste, to get to a circular economy and all that stuff. But how do we get our population, our residents, feeling excited about this more than the few who are? We have these open house, pick, whatever you want to call them, and we get almost the same people coming all the time. And it would be nice to see a different group of people getting excited about it. Do we have to do something to really stimulate it, like call it a different name, like shift or something like that? And I'm not being sarcastic, I'm just trying to find how we, when we were doing BRT, we were going steadily, and all of a sudden we hit on the name shift. And then people begin to pay attention and they begin to realize, oh, there's something here. And I just wonder how we're going to get, because we need to get people appreciating the fact that we need this diversion and we need to increase it to 60%. If it's going to cost more, an exorbitant amount more, then we still need to get them to accept it. So it just seemed to me that we need something else in there. Could you address that through you, Madam Chair?
Mr. Stanford, do we have a marketing or a campaign to help increase knowledge and communication?
Part of our report will clearly highlight the elements that the councillor just raised. Getting from 65 or 45% diversion up to 60% will be a significant challenge, and it has been in other communities, no doubt about it. Many of the Greater Toronto Area municipalities spend 4 to 5 times on public education and awareness to achieve the higher rates that they have achieved, in part because they've landed themselves into waste disposal crises over the years, where they've had higher cost systems. As a result, they've had to basically do their best to divert more materials to maintain a higher cost than what London is paying right now for waste management. So our challenges will actually be even more significant in many ways, because we have a very well-run, affordable system now. To do more will have an additional price point associated with it. How we maintain that and keep it to a minimum is going to be a challenge, and it's going to be a careful balance because of all the environmental priorities we have. And I think what we will, and we will commit to do, is make sure that you're well aware of all the costs, well aware of what we believe is required to move forward, but perhaps most importantly, to indicate clearly that we can move forward at London's pace. We don't have to look really at others, what others have done in our opinion. We should do what's right for London, move forward at an affordable pace. The right kind of pace. We don't have a landfill crisis. We have a wonderful asset there, and as you have just heard, we're moving forward on the right process there too. So I think we are in an enviable position to continue to do it at the right pace for London, but it's essential to understand that we will not get a future landfill expanded unless we make the higher level commitments that you've done already. So it's the fine balance. Going beyond 60%, my final comment on that will be, there are those that are beginning to nudge up to that level of above 60%. They are spending substantially more dollars than we are right now, in part because they've got themselves into a crisis. So we will put forward a very wise plan for committee and council to consider.
Well, I thank you for that, and I thank you for your faith in all this. I do have the faith too. When I talk to people, I try to get them excited about this. I listened to you the other day when we were talking at Goodwill, and you talk about a simple thing like chewing gum. People don't know what to do with it. But I look at people with a coffee cup, and they don't know whether they should throw the cover out with the coffee cup. They don't even know whether the coffee cup should be thrown in the recyclable bin or the waste bin. And I think that we tried to do this. The picture is right there on the picture that you put out, but we're not there yet. And it just seemed to me that a simple thing like a coffee cup, we should all know. I'm not going to say people. We should all know that you put that in the recycle bin. People say, yeah, but you put the cup, but not the cover. The pictures show the cover. So I'm just using that as an example, and I'm saying that we still have a long way to go because we are making a tremendous amount of effort through you, Madam Chair, over the past few years. I just get this feeling that it's not out there yet. And you talk about a challenge, I think it's going to be a greater challenge, particularly over the next 2 to 3 years. And I commend you for all the work that you're doing, because this is tremendous. Over the past 3 months, you've come to us, maybe 6 months, with a lot of this stuff, and even all this information we've had before you put it together. But it's us. My neighbor doesn't know anything about it. I told you my neighbor doesn't even put out the garbage. I don't know what they do with it. There's nothing there. I asked them the other day, what do you do with it? So I take it to my friend's shop. So anyway, I just thought I'd mention that because I'm trying to instill some inspiration between me and Councillor Squire and all the others around it. I always have to try to hit him a little bit to let him know that he's a great guy. I'm just kidding.
Thank you,
Thank you very
Councillor
much.
Usher.
Thank you.
I think you're right, and it's going to take inspired leaders. We see and we know that it's possible to have significant reduction, and it takes commitment, and it takes inspiration, and it takes people being intentional about their choices. So keep up doing what you're doing. I have Councillor Park and then Councillor Usher. Sorry, one last thing.
I think down in Vancouver, we keep talking about zero waste and a circular economy. Love food, hate waste. We're going to have to pick up some type of thing like that and start repeating it everywhere we go, or put it across our forehead.
I'll let you start with that. Councillor Park.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to page 77 of our lovely binder here. And talking about the process in step 7, the consideration of climate change, and it falls after the description of the preferred alternative. I just wanted to make sure that, you know, the whole concept is to kind of curb climate change and make sure that we're not creating further impacts. I just wanted to be sure that we're having that lens when we're talking about all the other alternative methods also, not just the one that we land on.
No, we cover off climate change on all elements. In fact, that is something new that the province added in just essentially with this latest round of information they provided to us. So it's a good thing to be doing.
Absolutely, and I just wonder when we go out to the general public and we're talking about this, if we can make sure that we're hammering that home, that that's exactly what we're doing. Because even looking at this list, it's like, oh, it's step 7. We need to make sure it's like embedded in people's brains that it's interwoven everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Helmer.
Councillor Usher covered what I wanted to ask about.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on this? Someone willing to move the staff recommendation? Hubert and then Usher. And I'd like to reflect back and go back to what Councillor Usher was saying in my comments. I think, you know, the biggest part of reduction is being very intentional in our choices as individuals. And we do need that to catch on and we do need that to spread, but it starts with us, starts with each person in each choice that we make. And as we start to do that, I think that's where you start to see some of those reduction targets being hit. So thank you, Councillor.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
I'm going to turn the chair over to Councillor Park.
Thank you. On to item number 4.1, a communication from Councillor Ridley. I'll let her talk about her communication.
Okay, so in spite of everything I just said about how we need to be intentional and inspired, I think there are times in the calendar year when people do produce more waste. And we have a unique 6-day cycle here in London in regards to our garbage collection and pickup. And what happens when your waste cycle falls over the Easter weekend, we have 2 stat days and 2 days without pickup. So it turns into 12 calendar days. And so we do an annual calendar. I would like staff to take a look at accommodating that in some way. After I wrote this letter, one thing Mr. Stanford and I spoke about is we do a spring unlimited pickup. Perhaps in the creation of the next calendar, that spring unlimited could be moved to after the Easter weekend. So I'm happy to leave this with staff, but I would hope that I would get some support from the committee to have some kind of recognition that when we have the double stat days, sometimes people are struggling a bit more than they would in a normal 6-day cycle.
Thank you, Councillor. Looking for other speakers? Councillor Usher, Hubert, and then Squire.
Thank you, thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks very much, Councillor, for bringing this up. I want to ask Mr. Stanford just to remind us, because some time ago we made a change, and I can't remember whether it was for this unique holiday period, and I can't remember what the change was. Can you enlighten me? Was it that we would allow more than 3 garbage containers, or was there something else? Do you remember?
Through the chair, when we lowered the container limit from 4 containers or 4 bags down to 3, council also approved the addition of 2 extra exemption periods. So there are actually 4 times during the year where residents can put out additional garbage bags for pickup. So that was the big change.
And that's what I was trying to remember. So, Councillor, through you, Madam Chair, would that not do what you're looking for here? Those exemptions for those holiday weekends?
Thank you. I'm happy to answer, and that was the conversation that Mr. Stanford and I had, was having that exemption period be the pickup following the Easter weekend. For example, so right now, after the Easter weekend, it was a typical pickup, and the next exemption period is in May. So you have people who have 12 days worth, and usually they're entertaining and such over holiday weekends such as that. So what I'm hoping staff will do is when they create the 2019 calendar is consider putting that exemption immediately following the Easter weekend.
So is that an additional weekend you're looking for? I don't mind. I would be prepared to refer this to staff and let them come back with that, whatever suggestion. So that's fine with me.
Thank you, Councillor. On to Deputy Mayor Hubert.
So I just want to know, how big a problem is this? I mean, we lowered the bag from 4 to 3. I get it, you get stretched out, but that happens, you know, with long weekends as well. It's an additional day. I understand what we do around Christmas time and all of that. But is this a huge problem, or is this just one of those things that happens to 1 or 2, half a dozen, 10 people?
Mr. Stanford?
Through the chair, we actually don't have much information on that. We do know that our calls do go up right after the Easter weekend because there was Good Friday and then there's Easter Monday. So there is an increase in calls right after that particular weekend. That's kind of been traditional. And just to clarify, we do have the current exemption right now, and that's occurring in really the first week of May. With respect to the Easter long weekend, that is also a weekend that is unusual because it actually changes each year. It floats from early April, as it was this year, to later in April. So it would be, if we were to consider an exemption, it would be a floating exemption day. But moving that to be consistent with when we have a traditionally higher generation waste period would be very consistent with council's direction from the past when we introduced 2 additional days. We focused on putting one early in the fall and one after Thanksgiving weekend, which is also known to be a little bit more of a larger waste production time of year.
Thank you, Mr. Stanford. I believe Councillor Ridley wanted to address those questions also.
I'm not sure if the counselor was directing his question to me, but I was going to reference earlier information that we got. And I think it's 80% of the time, most of London has less than 2 containers, right? It's not a widespread issue, but I think as Mr. Stanford said, you know, after these holiday weekends, that's the time when people have had family over and it becomes an issue. So most people are compliant most of the time, but they need those exemptions. So my hope is that we can just move that period.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
I'll support it if we're moving it, not adding. If that's what we're doing, I can support that. I know what happens in my neighborhood. If someone's a little overloaded, everyone just kind of looks around and says, okay, you know, my neighbor's got space because we had, you know, the hordes descended on us over the weekend, and that's what happens in most good neighborhoods, so.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Squire, and then back to Councillor Usher.
I'm sort of with Councillor or Deputy Mayor Hubert. Nobody's ever asked me about this in the 4 years I've been a councillor, and it seems a little contrary to what were talking about. But I guess what I want to know is, are there any cost implications of this? Is this cost neutral? Is it going to cost money, or do we know that, or do we need the report back to tell us that?
Mr. Stanford?
Through the acting chair, we believe if we just move the exemption period, it should be cost neutral, because we're having one in early May. I think it's going to start the last couple of days of April. So we would just be in this, if it occurred this year, we would have shifted it right to early in April. That typically is in the middle of the spring season, and I think when people refer to sort of spring cleaning and that type of activity, I think that can occur anytime in April. So if we did it for 2019, it would be on the understanding that if it was very problematic, it's something that could easily change. It's very much tied to the calendar and the information that people have on hand.
Once again, this is not at all a burning issue for me, and I'd like a report back. I wouldn't approve it today, but if there's just a report coming back, I'm happy to look at that. But I must admit, I get a little nervous when people say it shouldn't be, or it probably won't be. I worry about the cost implications of some of the things we do.
And thank you. Councillor Usher, did you have another question?
Just a final comment from me, really, is that I just don't want to go backwards. And when I say backwards, we move from 4 to 3. And I don't want to go back to 4, except for these 4 times. And if one of them is a flexible, that's okay. From my perspective, is that we should be ultimately at some point in going to 2 containers. And to me, that's the objective. I don't know when, whether it's 5 years from now or next week is immaterial. But the minute we start going backwards, then it doesn't help the situation. So I just want to make sure that when we get that report, it's not something that will take us even a little backwards is bad from my perspective.
Any further speakers before I speak from the acting chair? Go ahead. Councillor Ridley, go ahead.
Thank you. The motion that's in front of us, like in light of the discussions I've had with staff and the discussion that we've had here today, I'd be happy to change and move a motion that asks that the Civic Administration be requested to consider in the preparation of the next garbage and recycling calendar to move the unlimited pickup to the week immediately following the Easter holiday. If we want to report back, we could do it. I think that actually requires more work at this point. We're just requesting that they consider it. They can go away and punch whatever calculators they need to punch to make sure it makes sense for the corporation. If so, they do it, and if not, they don't. So that's a motion I'd be prepared to move. I think it's a straightforward thing. We're talking about moving that unlimited pickup with no additional costs. So I don't know if I have a seconder for that motion, but that's what I would put forward.
Okay, with the indulgence of the committee. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I just don't know what it means, really. I hear it here, and I'd really like staff to look at it and then say, this is what we come up with, because I don't want to approve something like that unless staff tells me that they had time to look at it, and this is what it means. So I hate to do it, but what it really means is that we need staff to come back to us with a report.
Thank you, Counselor. I'm just going to take this opportunity to speak. I remember a lot of the rationale for it being the May month for the unlimited pickup was because of students moving out of areas that are in my ward and also Counselor Squire's ward. So I have a bit of concern about moving it at this point, but I think that I'm certainly open to the motion that was in the letter talking about having a report back and talking about those implications for around May. If students are moving out and we actually need to have that unlimited pickup at that point, I would rather not have those consequences on our sidewalks and streets with excess garbage on the streets if we don't have to be. Thank you. So with that, Councillor Ridley, would you like to move your original motion or the supplementary motion that you had created?
I'd be happy to remove whatever motion. I think staff need to look at this. So why don't we make a motion that requests that Civic Administration review the garbage and recycling counselor and report back regarding best dates for a spring unlimited pickup. So that gives us a report back. They can factor in all of those considerations and see.
Alrighty, I'm seeing nods from staff. Is there a seconder to that? Councillor Usher has seconded. Any further speakers to that? Okay, seeing none, we can call the question. She's just entering it into the system. Okay, we're just entering it into the system and then we shall vote when it's ready. All right, the motion should be up and the vote is open. So just for those viewing at home, the motion is that Civic Administration be requested to review the 2019 waste pickup calendar and report back to Civic Works Committee with a recommendation for the best dates in the spring for unlimited container pickup.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-1.
And with that, I'll give the chair back to Councillor Ridley.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I think we're on to deferred matters and additional business. So the deferred matters chart is in your package. Does anyone have any comments on that or additional business? Deputy Mayor Hubert.
So I was reviewing this partly because we're kind of moving into that period of time when things kind of start to wind down and head towards a date in October with the voters. And I'm looking at file number 44, item number 2, and it indicates that it should be back in the second quarter, which is also winding down. I think we just talked about spring cleaning, Madam Chair. I'm kind of not sure we can even talk about that yet, given what's outside. But the second quarter does end the end of June. I'm aware of that. But what kind of concerns me is that one's been kind of hanging around for 3 years. So I'd like a little answer on that. Let me just give me a couple ones. And then Mr. Stanford, we just talked about recycling, and this is in the downtown, and I know that that's been one that you and I have talked about at length over the years, and probably complicated now with various construction projects that your colleague, Mr. Soldo, has undertaken in terms of digging up roads and all of those sorts of things. So I'd like to hear a little bit about that. as well. The other ones we talked about warranted sidewalks the last time, and I think that one's kind of in hand. I'm not sure there's any others that I have, but those were just a couple of them that, oh yeah, and then Pack Road, Colonel Talbot, that's the pedestrian sidewalk issue, which I'm not sure how that connects with the warranted sidewalk program, but it continues to be an issue. So those are just several. Actually, I noticed warranted sidewalks back on again on the very end of this list. So maybe we can pull those all together, Ms. Sure. But those are several that I kind of have a bit of an interest in, if we could.
Ms. Chair, do you want to comment as to, are we going to meet the timelines that are outlined? I think the very last one, Deputy Mayor, was one that was just added from the last meeting. So
Yeah, I just wonder if we could
package them together. Do you want to comment to that, Ms. Chair?
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, I certainly can comment on those, and I may ask Mr. Stanford to weigh in on the status of the downtown recycling initiative. With respect to the warranted sidewalk programs, the Pack Road and Colonel Talbot sidewalk, those were both recently added to the work program for the administration, to this committee. We certainly can bring this back as a single consolidated report. We would need to move that later in the year. The warranted sidewalk program edition number 17 is to come up with a policy or an approach for a community pedestrian strategy or community mobility strategy, which is something new for us. So that will take a bit more time. So that one would likely be towards year end, if that's the case, if there's a desire to combine all three. With respect to the second item, which is the consulting services, that one is an oldie but a goldie going back to 2015. It's been on the work list for staff for this committee for some time. The work is actively underway. It's a very difficult thing to quantify because we're trying to compare the costs we incur, including our overhead costs and the loss of capacity for dealing with day-to-day work for projects relative to what it costs us to outsource that work. And it's not always a linear comparison. That said, we have made the decision to add some staff resources for things like clean water, wastewater as well, and that report is in hand to come back this quarter. And Mr. Stanford, do you have anything to add with respect to the downtown recycling?
Through the chair, we're still on target to have a report we're looking at basically the end of June for Civic Works Committee. We have had ongoing discussion with downtown London on some of the challenges we face and some of their expectations. Perhaps our biggest hurdle right now, though, is still the financing side. And the financing on this particular project is very tied into how industry under Stewardship Ontario will be proceeding in this province. We'd hope to have all that information solidified by now. It was meant to have been submitted into the provincial government back in February, if you recall, from the work that we've done and presented here. That did not take place. It's caught in, I guess, in between a couple different agencies, including the provincial government right now, and we're still waiting for the latest round of information on how it's going to move forward. And we believe there that there's a very good chance it might not move forward before the provincial election, meaning that would then rest until somewhere late August, September before it's picked up again. In our next report, we'll have more information on that. We know that the cost increase for recycling downtown would be somewhere between, on the low end, $30,000, upwards as high as $75,000. That financing piece from industry that contributes right now a very small portion is very important to determining our final outcome for that particular project, because that would dictate really what type of system we could put in place downtown. That is why that information is key, and why we've been unable to actually complete this particular package of work right now is the uncertainty we've been dealing with.
I appreciate that answer. That's really helpful. One comment back, when we were talking about the Easter weekend, I'll tell you, I drove downtown on Easter Monday, and Dundas Street was embarrassing. Merchants had obviously put out their garbage on Thursday night, and I know we talked to them until we're blue in the face. Pickup wasn't going to happen until Tuesday morning. And Dundas Street was a absolute, I don't have a word for it. It was beyond embarrassing. It looked like on both sides of the street, all the way from Talbot, all the way to Wellington, there was garbage either way. We went all the way out to the East Village, all the way along Dundas Street. There was garbage bags. They'd been ripped into. There was cardboard recycling. It was really, really bad and embarrassing for a weekend that we would have visitors coming in. Something we need to look at. And so I'll let you just comment on that. I'll come back to the consulting piece.
Through the chair, no, very important comments, but I'd just like to clarify. We actually had picked up garbage, believe it or not, on the Saturday and the Sunday. So what you experienced on the Monday was the garbage that came out, being a holiday for many governments and locations. We didn't pick up garbage on the Monday. That is why so much was out. Unfortunately, the customers in that area don't follow the calendar as well as they should, or the instructions, so they did put their stuff out. But I can promise the majority of it was not there on the Saturday and the Sunday. It came out Sunday night, basically, and was not collected until Tuesday morning.
I think that we need to go back to our partners at, downtown London. I know it drives Jeanette MacDonald absolutely over the hill and up and around the bend crazy, but it really was bad. To the consulting piece, I think if I was looking at this issue in the rear view mirror, it might have been one where we had, our outsourced internal auditor actually work with us a little bit on that one, because it is very hard to tease apart. I understand that, because you have to look at your fixed costs as well as your variable costs, and to determine the overheads and how do you proportion those things at all of the elements. So I understand that, but it's also one where often we're critiqued, and we do send a lot of money out. And if you look, there was a report on corporate services today. You see where those monies go in terms of consulting, and not just in engineering, but right across the board. So it's one that we're worthy of looking at to see if we can find the efficiency. So thank you for the indulgence, Chair.
Thank you. And just so everyone knows, it is my goal that as much as possible that we've completed the deferred matters list before the end of the term. So I'll remind people of that as we add items to it. Any other additional matters? Councillor Usher.
Just wonder, through you, Madam Chair, in those areas where we don't have a date, is there a possibility of putting a date? I'm referring to things like private drain connection, and a few others that we don't have a date for, the requested expected date I'm talking about. I think that there were 2 or 3 of them that I saw when I went through this before coming to the meeting. Another one was the Municipal Greenhouse Gas Challenge Fund. And and then I had all these to be decided. I just wondered if we need to put a date to those, or it's impossible to put a date to them. Perhaps staff could tell us.
Yeah, I'm happy to provide comment on that, Councillor Usher. Staff have indicated that before the next meeting, they'll be able to fill out many of those. The ones that are to be determined all came out of recent meetings, so I think they're still looking at what length of time they need to prepare the reports, but I expect by the next meeting, we should be able to have tentative dates, and Ms. Scher is nodding in agreement on that. So if you can hold off till mid-May, they should be there. Okay, do I need a motion? Oh, I need a seconder for a motion. Councillor Usher. You don't even know what you're moving. I don't think we're there yet. We're not at adjournment. We'll put the motion up on screen. I believe it's probably a receipt of the deferred matters list.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And just before we move adjournment, I'm just going to let the committee know that there will be a letter submitted for the next meeting, but I won't be in attendance. Councillor Park will be chairing the May meeting, as I will be out of the province. So if I can get a motion for adjournment, Councillor Hubert and Usher. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Have a great week, everyone.